Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Tennessee Fats, and today we're doing the next in our series of Robert E. Howard Battle Royales. Now in this series, what I do is I go back and I take a look at an original Robert E. Howard story. I'll give you a quick synopsis of it so you know what it's about, and then I compare and contrast two different comic interpretations of that story that have been published. At the end of it, I'm going to give you my opinion as to which one you should read out of the two and which one you shouldn't. The goal at the end of this entire series is that you're going to have a nice list of every single book that you should go out there to get your Robert E. Howard on. Now, today's story is going to be an interesting one because we're doing one of my favorite Robert E. Howard stories, which is The Tower of the Elephant. It's a pretty cool story. I'll walk you through it in a nutshell in a little bit, and we'll do that later. But the compare and contrast is also going to be interesting because in that, I'm actually comparing and contrasting a version of this by Marvel with another version of this by Marvel. Yeah, that's going to be weird. But without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, we are back. Now, I'll tell you, I would be amiss if I did not do the obligatory YouTube thing right here and say, if you like Robert E. Howard content, if you like me talking about these things, and you like the content of the channel, give this a like, give it a thumbs up, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Adding comments also is a lot of fun. I have been getting comments lately, and that I think is really cool. So I appreciate it. Feel free to throw them down there. I like discussing Conan. I like discussing Robert E. Howard. Let's get that on. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today we are talking about, as I said earlier, The Tower of the Elephant. Now, this is the version of the book that I have. This is how I read my Conan. I have one book, it's the collection, it's quite nice. Now, Tower of the Elephant, we're not going to flip through pages here because that'll just be boring for you. Tower of the Elephant it's a short story. It's not that many pages, actually. I think it's less than 20 pages. 3 different chapters. It's effectively a story of robbery, for lack of a better word. But it's also a story in which you see some character development in Conan. The story is placed early in Conan's life, at least as near as I can tell, where he's gone to a village. He's really seen still as an outsider. There's even reference in Robert E. Howard's story of him having a bit of an accent when he's using the foreign tongues that aren't really known that well to him. And he ends up having a bit of a skirmish at a bar up front, goes and breaks into what is the Tower of the Elephant. He's heard tale of something called the Heart of the Elephant. He wants to go steal it. While he's there, he runs into another thief. They get through into the tower without any spoilers. Quite frankly, but this shouldn't be a spoiler. The book is 100 years old, for crying out loud. If you haven't read it by now, this is not a spoiler. Other thief gets himself killed. Conan manages to survive that little encounter, goes on, and runs into effectively what is an alien, which is an individual that used to have wings, that has the body of a man and the head of an elephant. It's a magical creature that is unfortunately being tortured and is suffering and has been for 300 years under the control of a wizard. And this wizard has turned around and then made his life a living hell. At the end of the story, Conan actually ends up killing this individual out of an act of mercy. We'll get to that in a little bit. And helps this other being cast a spell which ends up ending the sorcerer that has been torturing him for all these years. And then he goes away, the tower collapses, and everything's fine. That's the end of the story. Really interesting story, short story, but what I like about it is in this, Conan, who I guess is early in his career, as I mentioned earlier, ends up with a run-in with what would be to him a monster. And with an initial feeling of fear, turns to compassion and actually learns to care for this monster just through conversing with it, which I thought was really cool. That's why I've always really liked this story. I've had a soft spot for this one because it really shows the growth of Conan. The other reason why I really like this one is because it's just pure, just barbarian theft and just action going all the way through. It's a good story. That's the nutshell right there. And quite frankly, but if you hadn't read this, you now know what it's about. So thumbs up for you. So when you read this and you say to yourself, okay, I want to read a comic version, so let's just put this up over here and out of the way. Charlie Brown, you keep an eye on that, shall I? All right. You have a variety of different options to read this story. And today we're talking about the two Marvel versions. So you have the original Marvel comics. This is Conan number 4. All right. Good story. There you go. The other option you have through Marvel is this. Savage Sword of Conan. This is number 24. Very cool. And if you were actually really careful and you were out there looking around, you might also see this. This is not the Tower of the Elephant. Quite interesting, actually, as an aside here. Let's talk about this. Original published reprint. One of the things Marvel did between Savage Sword and Conan Saga. Conan Saga, for those of you who don't know, are reprints of old Savage Sword issues. I didn't know this until recently. They sometimes repurposed and stole covers. They would oftentimes just reprint the entire thing with the cover within it, but no. This is the story of the Tower of the Elephant, as you can see along the bottom here. This is not the Tower of the Elephant. Same cover. Not the Tower of the Elephant. Not the same thing. Not at all. Don't buy this if you want to read Tower of the Elephant. The cover is the same thing, not the book. So we'll set that aside there. There's my PSA for the day. If I've just saved you $5, you're welcome. All right, so you have that. You have that. Here's a reader copy, of course, of Savage Sword, which we'll be talking about and getting to later. The other option you have to read the Tower of the Elephant, you can go and get yourself the Conan Volume 1. This is the Dark Horse reprint of the original Marvel stories, Tower of the Elephant and Other Stories. You can go and get yourself the Barry Windsor-Smith Conan collection. I believe there are 2 volumes in this. And you could also go out and get this one, Savage Sword of Conan Volume 2, the Dark Horse reprints, which happens to have that Savage Sword in it. These are all just reprints, by the way, of those 2 original books. Now, not all of us are made of money. Not all of us are quite happy when it comes to actually tearing apart and going into an original story like this and reading it. That's fine. You don't have to. That's why you have the reprint options set that aside. If you are going out and buying Savage Sword number 24, which you might be, what I would suggest for you is that you get a cheap reader copy. This is my cheap reader copy. That's what we'll be going through today. Now, when I was reading them, to give you a sense of what I read, if you do have the choice, by the way, of getting these, that's why I'm talking about them. Savage Sword of Conan Volume 2, really hard trade paperback to get your hands on. I ended up buying this with the complete collection of these, 1 through I think it's 18, as one bundle, just because I had Savage Sword of Conan number 1, the trade paperback number 1, but I did not have number 2, which had the Tower of the Elephant in it, which is what I wanted to read. So that's a good one to read. That's what I read when I was going through this, to give you an example of which one of these I read when I was doing my side-by-side comparison. These are nice, don't get me wrong, but when you open them up, they just don't, I don't know, they don't sit right. They don't sit right for me. And for those of you who have watched some of my other videos, you'll have watched, actually, if you watched my playlist where I'm talking about comic binding, and that's where I talk about the lay of a book or the lie of a book, how it sits when it's open. I don't know. The hardcover, for me, is the easier one to read. Mostly because it just sits right. I have no issue going right to the inside when I'm trying to turn the pages and I'm reading the story to get a sense of it. I like it. That's why I would choose that one. If you do want to see more of what stuff I talk about with the lay of a book and how you read it, well, quite frankly put, you can watch those other videos and go for it. There's actually a couple pages from the reprint of this story right here. Just give you a side-by-side right there. Bang-a-bang-a-bongo. There's the page, there's the page. So same thing, same quality of the print. This was actually a really nice trade paperback, by the way. I do like the quality of the print on this. So that's what we'll go through today. We'll use this when we're talking about the comic version. We'll actually go to my reader copy of the Savage Sword when we're talking about the magazine version. So I guess what we'll do here is we'll start with the comic version. We'll start with this, shall we? What's fun about these videos is when I record them, I do them in one take. If I screw up, I screw up. And you're going to hear it. It's just what happens, because quite frankly, but I don't feel like doing these many times. I just want to give you my honest opinion once and move on. All right, so Tower of the Elephant, the cover right here. Let's start with that. It's a very nice Barry Windsor-Smith cover. It's interesting. At the time, he was still Barry Smith's signature down here in the corner. Barry Smith with an X after it. Now, I will say this. This is a common theme, and I'm going to point this out now. What you see here is Conan with a giant spider and a young lady down here who seems to be in some sort of peril. There is no young lady in this story whatsoever. Just throw that out there right now. There's no heroine, no nothing in this story. In fact, the only time you actually have reference to a female in the entire story is in the beginning of the story where he gets into a bar fight. But that's it. It's interesting that here we have this female, and over here, interesting that the painted Earl Norham cover, which came out after this, by the way, clearly seemed to follow the same motif. Giant spider, Conan, sword, and young lady who seems to be in peril in the background there. Again, there was no lady in this story. I don't get that. Obviously, there's our elephant dude right there. Really cool depiction of the elephant dude. Interesting there was no depiction of the elephant dude on this one. All right, so that's the cover. Bing bang bang. Now you've seen it. Okay, so let's walk through this. So what I like about the early Conan books through the Conan comic series, is the art. I think that Barry Windsor Smith did a fantastic job in a lot of this stuff, and obviously that's why I own the Barry Windsor Smith Conan archives. I really enjoy his take on it, and by buying the archives, it gives me the opportunity to read through these and take a look at the art page by page, because it's really something. There was one reference, I believe it's in the second volume of this book actually, where there's a hidden message, which you wouldn't even see if you were looking at the original comic anymore, just because of age. So the story is very simple here. This starts, and I'll tell you, Cole's notes on this one, high level, this is a very brief version of the Tower of the Elephant. The story starts with, okay, there's a bar fight, it happens, there's our guy who's the professional kidnapper, gets into a fight. I would argue that this whole depiction of the whole bar fight that starts the story was pretty close to the actual written version of the story. Some of the dialogue is taken directly from it, and there's, by the way, the lady that I was referencing. Very close to it. There's a key line that was at the end of this bar fight, which isn't caught here, in which they talk to the fact that, you know, it appears the barbarian in his darkness used his barbarian, I think it's, his senses to find his prey in the darkness, because he does end up killing this professional kidnapper. Some little nuances in here, even though it was very brief, it added. Here is the sorcerer that's making his way into the castle. Yera, by the way, is his name. And this, I'll tell you, this whole piece here was not in the story at all. And I think what they were doing there was they were really trying to depict this sorcerer dude as a bad dude. Now, in the written story, that's communicated through really the depth of suffering that this elephant guy is suffering. But here, for some reason, they decided to add this little nuance here where he's snapping and really being a dick to one of his guards. So anyway, story clicks along. Conan has watched this back and forth, by the way. He jumps over the fence. He gets inside. He meets other guy, as I mentioned, other thief. One of the things that happens in here is, it's actually really interesting. In the written story, they make a big deal about the fact that the lions don't make any noise when they attack. Conan's heard of lions. He hasn't really experienced much of them at this point in his career. But he's surprised that for some reason they're not roaring when they're attacking, because that's what his senses are telling him they do. For example, roar, blast you. Roar as you die, blast you, why don't you roar? He kills this one lion. This is actually a pretty pivotal point in the story as well, because it shows that, you know, they've gassed these other lions to death. But for some reason, this one still survived, and Conan, through his barbarian wits, quote unquote, turned around and sliced the thing before it actually killed him. I honestly don't know how somebody would actually kill a charging lion with a sword. That to me seems, I don't know, a little far-fetched, but whatever. Now, it's interesting here. You see this image of the lions right here. On the inside cover of the book, there's our lions right there. Very cool. Very neat. I just noticed that the other day when I was flipping through here. The story continues along. They climb up the rope. He makes a point of how the rope is going to hold his weight, directly out of the written story. They get up to the top. Conan feels like he's being a little bit betrayed, but at the end of the day, he wasn't. Other thief is killed. Now, this is interesting. In here, you see these chests that are strewn about the room, and you see the sofas. That was directly taken from the story. For some reason, the story, which is fairly short, spent a fair amount of time talking and describing this particular room. And the chests, some being open, some being closed, and the 3 sofas. Kind of odd the way they did that. Now, what is not in this depiction is the fact that it was a mirrored floor. I distinctly remember a mirrored floor referenced, which is why Conan saw a shadow scurrying across it. So that was kind of missed. Interesting they got that feature, but not the rest. And then you get to the point of, okay, Conan is, you know, dealing with this spider. The spider at the end of the day is moving too fast for Conan, and Conan is also moving too fast for the spider. So they're just not making contact. So the spider intelligently decides to snare him in the webs. And throughout the story, Conan is not really getting ensnared in the webs until the very end when it catches his ankle. The spider then climbs down the wall. Conan throws this chest and squishes the spider against the wall, and the spider's dead. In this, the spider actually gets away by stealing his sword and then immediately entangles him. Not quite the same, a little faster than what happened in the story, but whatever. You're running low on page count, so what are you going to do? Here we get the introduction to our green monster, our elephant dude, which is pretty cool. I thought this was actually a very good depiction. I thought one of the things that was in the written story was they talk a big amount about how his body was deformed, showing signs of the rack. You don't really get a sense of that in the way they depict him here. He seems to be physically completely fit, other than the fact that he's blind. It's interesting that they tell a little bit of the story of how his race came to Earth and they lost their wings. They're actually rebels from another planet, which is kind of neat. I'd actually like to see more about that at a later date, but no, it's too late now. Robert E. Howard is dead. I'd like to see what he was actually planning on doing with that. Anyways, here we have Conan turns around and through a mercy kill, kills the elephant dude. Now, this is an interesting part. Obviously, we had to edit this because of the Comics Code Authority. In the story, the written story, Conan has to cut out his heart and then squeeze the blood from his still pumping heart onto the stone in order for the spell to take effect. Here, all he does, obviously, is he kills him. He's depicted here with no blood. Obviously killed off panel here. And for some reason, now the stone magically is just glowing red. So they obviously skipped that part. Then you get over to the actual spell being cast against Yara by his unfortunate victim here. This was actually a very close depiction of what was happening in the comics, in the story, other than the fact that in the story they made a big deal about the fact that he ran around the jewel 3 times before he was sucked into it. Well, actually before he finally cried, threw his arms up in the air and was drawn to it, climbed in and sucked up into it. And then inside the jewel, this is where he gets, obviously, our unintended victim here, who we can now see, by the way, gets his vengeance, and the stone disappears. Conan makes his way out. Tower shatters, and that is literally the last line of the story. The tower shatters behind him. Very briefly here, there were soldiers on the ground floor. This is the reason why they climbed up the wall to begin with. They totally skipped the part about, the soldiers were killed through magic by that particular, well, they reference it here, but it's very glancing, by our green monster. Pretty good depiction of the story, the written story. Pretty good. Not going to argue with that. That was all right. Okay. Now, let's get my reader copy. Which one's my reader copy? This one's my reader copy. Here you go. There you go. Part of the Tennessee Fats collection. You'll see my written notes up here. Yes, I do write in cursive. And people have a very hard time reading my cursive. And I'm not going to lie to you, I don't care. I write my cursive for me to read, not for you to read. So, I've already talked about the cover. We've talked about the fact that there's a woman on here. I don't understand why. All right, getting right into it here. Now, here's one thing that you'll notice about a magazine versus the comic. The comic fits entirely in here, in a bag, in a board, and still doesn't actually match the footprint of the magazine. These magazines, and correct me if I'm wrong, near as I can tell, were specifically made to be sold to an older demographic. They did not follow the whole Comics Code Authority. And as such, they were allowed to be purposely grittier. They were dirtier. And I'll tell you, one of the things that they were very well known for, and this is as a young teen lad growing up reading these, you bought these for one reason, well, for multiple reasons. If you're a Conan fan like me, you bought them for the Conan content, but, sip of coffee there. The other reason why you bought this is the boobs. In these early issues of Savage Sword, I think they were actually more aggressively just trying to throw as many boobs in these as they possibly could. It was classic. It was just funny reading these when you're used to reading the comics, which are somewhat, dumbed down and somewhat tame. Suddenly you get this aggressive nature in here because for some reason, and this is particular to Marvel's depiction of Conan, and I don't think Robert E. Howard ever actually intended this. Not only is Conan this giant killing machine that runs around the wilderness and is the toughest thing on the planet, but he's a phenomenal womanizer. Robert E. Howard, I don't think, had that. I can't think of any particular Robert E. Howard story that I have read to date that has had Conan being the intergalactic gigolo that he is. And which is why every single time, for some reason, he's seducing some woman. This particular story is not seducing some woman, though. And this particular one, I did not find that much boobage just being thrown in our face, so good to them. So, our story. We started off with the bar fight. This was a very good telling of the bar fight. Right over here, Barbarian has killed his man in the darkness in confusion. Very clearly drawing in that line. The dialogue here, I think, was exactly what it was in the written book. Very good job on that for that particular chapter. One thing that was missing, though, which was here, in the written book, he's wearing a cloak, like a ratty cloak, and I think he throws off the ratty cloak when he goes outside in the moonlight, and I believe that is a very clear comment that Robert E. Howard made because he wanted to show that at least Conan was trying to blend in at that initial chapter. because as you can see, the way they always depict him is just naked dude with loincloth and then little slippery booty things. So he goes to the tower. He's going to break into it. This all pretty much matches and is pretty much in line with what was briefly outlined here. But this does not have that little vignette where you see Yara come in and basically verbally accost one of his employees. He gets in, he finds a dead guardsman who was killed by this guy, the other thief. And this dialogue, again, very close to the written work. I also found this depiction of the thief to be a little closer to what Robert E. Howard had intended in his. Neither of them were bang on, though. I think what Robert E. Howard was clearly going for in there was that this guy was rotund. He had a little bit of mass to him, which is what's surprising because he was a thief and he was so lithe. They were clearly drawing that juxtaposition into the written work, but didn't seem to translate into this. Here you have, again, the lions are going to be a problem. They gas the lions. They're going to climb up onto the tower. The depiction of the tower also very different here. It talks more to the jewels on the top of the tower, not all the way up the tower, which is what we saw in the images of the the colored comic version. And here, of course, is that scene where, again, you're killing the lion. Again, I don't know how somebody would survive a lion attack. But again, they make a big deal about this here. That makes no sounds. Where was it? Why didn't the cursed beast roar as it charged? Not as much of a big deal as they made here. Here, for some reason, they seem to think it was more. Here, by the way, they seem to think it was more important. Anyways, they climb up the 150 feet to the top. Again, a little more detail here, wherein Conan is feeling like he's betrayed shortly. Then, of course, this guy doesn't make it. Again, talking more to the context, more detail that's actually coming directly to the story. There's him on the tower. Into the room. Here's your chests again. Closed chests, 3 sofas, open chests, stuff all over the floor. Very good depiction of the description of what it is. This giant vaulted roof. And again, you're talking about a mirrored floor sort of thing. You are getting a sense that does look somewhat mirrored. Of course, it's just all black here, but you see the lines below it. I believe that is an attempt at a mirrored floor. And of course, giant spider comes out of nowhere. It's a problem, cuts off an arm. The battle seems to roughly match, and there it is. It catches his ankle. Spider runs down the wall. This one gets a little off. The other one had spider run down the wall. Chest hits spider on wall. Why spider is splatted. Here, spider's on floor. I got that one off. I don't understand that one, but whatever. He heads downstairs, sees elephant monster. Now here, we have a clear depiction of elephant monster, and that body looks a lot more well used than we saw in the comic version. He is clearly not doing well. Like, his hands literally look broken here. This, I think, was more close tied in. This is what we're talking about. And they have a dialogue again. Conan feels pity for him. Again, here's them coming to Earth with their wings. Here's the history of them. A pretty good story of the history of them. And Conan, hold on, we skipped a page there. Skip the page, back up. Conan does turn around and listen to him and says, okay, no problem. Well, somewhat grimly, and kills him and goes and digs out his heart. Heart dug out, squeezes it, blood into stone, blood absorbed into the stone, goes downstairs and finds Yara. And here is the whole story of him shrinking, running around it, getting sucked into it. And then there's the vengeance wherein this poor godlike creature ends up going after him, and then the stone just disappears. Now, a key point here that was missed in the comic version is there were guards on the ground floor. Both of them talked about the guards on the ground floor. That's why they climbed up the rope outside the tower to go and actually get into it. But in here, you have, because again, I think what they're trying to do here in this depiction is being very clear and matching what Robert E. Howard did, is this dude is not without guilt. All right, our elephant dude here, although he's out for vengeance, he murders these soldiers through magic so that Conan can get out. Here's the grisly depiction of it. Conan knows, okay, yep, he kept his word. He told me it would be a clear way for me to leave, and lo and behold, he did. He's leaving. He spends a little time here wondering about that lion. That wasn't really in the story. But then, of course, tower collapses. And that is the end of the whole story. That's how the whole thing comes about. Now, what did I think of these? Actually, you know what's interesting? I think I've got somebody who's drawn over. Yeah, somebody's inked over this page. You can see the blue ink coming through. Anyways, what do I think of these? Let's do the side by side here. What do I think? Okay, final conclusion. I've walked through and I've said, I've read through each of these, and I've given you guys a synopsis of, well, what do I think and what did I see? Now, I think what's probably leaked out here a fair amount in my comments and my commentary is that the comic version is a much shorter version of this story. The magazine is much more in detail and really talks through the detail of Robert E. Howard's story. Do I think that's better or do I think that's worse? All right. Well, top line here, if you're going for pure art, I would say these are evenly tied. They are, I love Barry Windsor Smith's art. The art in this I thought was fantastic as well. So I would not say one is better than the other. I would say they are very different art styles. Color version, though, is always preferable on the eyes to read as opposed to a black and white version. Just throwing that out there. Story-wise, this one adapted the story a little bit to fit more into the comic motif, also to apply to the Comic Code Authority. This one did not. This one was a very true depiction of the Robert E. Howard story. So this one was much closer to the written work. The morals and the stories that come out of them were both the same. Neither of them ended up with a different beginning where they had to throw in some crazy backstory to explain why Conan was there in a bar fight. None of them did that. They really stuck to their guns on this one and really did a good job of just sticking to what should have been confined in the story. But of the two, if you were to read these, I would strongly encourage you to read the Savage Sword version if you only read one. This really does go back to matching what Robert E. Howard meant to do in his story. This version over here shows the growth, this version over here shows the grisliness, and this one really sticks to even the dialogue that was in the original story. So of the two, as much as I love the comic versions, I would say you want to stick with the Savage Sword of Conan on this one. Yeah, there you go. So everybody, I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to clean up this giant mess now, and I'm going to drink some more coffee because that was a lot of talking. And we will see you in the next one. You have yourself a great day.